Hello YouTube, this is Darth Senior 92 here with a deck tech video to kind of revive my channel. Kind of haven't really been into the brewing as much lately, and mostly just because of grad school and other obligations, but I came up with a pretty spicy deck list with a bunch of War of the Spark cards. So this is a deck I'm calling Esper Lattice. It is for the modern format. Alright, so first we're going to work with our 1 mana spells and kind of work up to the top of the curve, mana base and all that. And then we'll get into the sideboard and the combos. So first we got a total of 3 copies of Inquisition of Kozilek for early game discard. And then 2 copies of Thoughtseize, also pretty solid discard spell. 2 copies of Path to Exile for removal. 2 copies of Fatal Push. And then 1 copy of Surgical Extraction in the main board, just because there's a bunch of graveyard decks going on that we kind of want to shut down, give ourselves a chance. Up next, 3 copies of Dreadhorde Invasion in the 2 mana slot. For those of you who don't know, this card is very similar to the Bitter Blossom, although instead of going wide with tokens, you go big and just kind of produce a large token over time, and then if the token gets 6 power or greater, then it gains lifelink, so you kind of get rewarded later on for the life that you lost. And then 2 copies of Search for Escanta, just to help churn through our deck, find our responses later on. 2 copies of Collective Brutality, just a multimodal removal spell. It acts as discard, life gain / drain, and then kills a weaker creature. 1 copy of Dovin's Veto, basically just negate with upside. 4 copies of Teferi Time Raveler. So this card's very interesting. So the static ability on this, which is new with War of the Spark, each opponent can cast spells only anytime they could cast a sorcery. This is very important because it turns our opponents off of counter magic. Otherwise, you can +1 them to cast a sorcery as if it had flash until your next turn. -3, return up to 1 target artifact, creature, or an enchantment to its owner's hand, then draw a card. Then 4 copies of Lingering Souls, just a little token production, helps us stay alive. And then 2 copies of Deliver Unto Evil. So there are better cards you could be running. Mostly I just like the artwork, but it's also kind of like a reverse Gifts Ungiven. So whereas Gifts Ungiven, you search for 4 cards from your deck, and then an opponent puts 2 of them into the yard and the other 2 into your hand. This you choose 4 that are already in the graveyard, and then your opponent chooses 2. The 2 that they choose actually stay in the graveyard, and then the other 2 go to your hand. So it's a way to recur things if you want to get like extra lands, or maybe you were forced to discard something. This just gives you a way of getting some of those cards back. And then 3 copies of Karn, the Great Creator. So this is kind of the number 1 reason why I initially built this deck. So it has a static ability that activated abilities of artifacts your opponent's control can't be activated. Until your next turn, up to 1 target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness, each equal to its converted mana cost. And -2, you may choose an artifact card you own from outside the game or in exile, reveal that card and put it into your hand. So in competitive play, what this means is you grab the artifact out of your sideboard and you put it into your card. I'm going to put this over here because we're not quite done talking about that. I just want to get through the rest of the deck first. 3 copies of God Eternal Kefnet, 4 mana, 4/5 flyer. You may reveal the first card you draw each turn as you draw it. Whenever you reveal an instant or sorcery card this way, copy that spell, and you may cast the copy. The copy costs 2 less to cast. Now, if at any point this will be put into the graveyard or exile from the battlefield, you can instead tuck it 3 cards deep into your deck. Makes it very recursive, hard to actually get rid of, but more importantly, it reduces our spell costs and lets us copy them, so we get double use out of our cards if we top deck them, either on our turn or our opponent's turn. And then 2 copies of Wrath of God, just a little nice sweeper. If you do top deck this with a Kefnet on the field, it just costs double white, or you could +1 to Fairy and then flash this in on your opponent's turn. For the mana base, pretty simple. 4 Polluted Deltas, 4 Flooded Strands, 3 Watery Graves, 2 Hallowed Fountains, 1 Godless Shrine, 2 Celestial Colonnades, 2 blast zones. So this is another card from War of the Spark. It's basically a ratchet bomb on a land. Enters battlefield with a charge counter. You can tap it for waste. You could pay XX and tap it to put X charge counters on it. Or pay 3, tap it and sack it to destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost equal number of charge counters on blast zone. And 2 swamps, 2 islands, 2 plains. Alright, so getting back to Karn over here, and the reason for building this deck. Alright, so as many of you are probably aware, this Karn has the potential to completely lock somebody out of the game. Alright, so by being able to tutor out any artifact from exile or your sideboard, putting it into your hand, ultimately what you want is Mycosynth Lattice. So all permanents are artifacts in addition to their other types. All cards that aren't on the battlefield, spells, and permanents are colorless, and players may spend mana, or mana of any color. So this turns everything into an artifact, including lands, and then because tapping a land for mana is an activated ability, Karn says that my opponents can't do that. They can't activate planeswalker abilities, creature abilities, enchantments, they can't tap their lands for mana, you just hard lock them out of the game. But we're not running 3 copies of Karn just to grab that one artifact. We also have a bunch of utility artifacts in the sideboard to tutor out. We got Crucible of Worlds if we need to like recur fetch lands or blast zones to just kind of repeatedly rat the board. Ensnaring Bridge just to keep people off of attacking us and our planeswalkers. 2 copies of Pithing Needle in the sideboard just to hate on things like Ether Vial or problematic planeswalkers. 2 copies of Relic Progenitus, again because graveyard-based decks are rampant right now between Arclight Phoenix decks and Dredge. So just having extra graveyard removal that we can tutor out. 2 copies of Damping Spheres for the Tron matchups. 2 copies of Disdainful Strokes, also for the Tron matchups. And then 2 copies of Disenchant. It is an instant, destroy target artifact or enchantment if we have the Mycosynth Lattice out. This basically just says 2 mana, destroy anything. 1 more copy of Davin's Veto just for the control matchup. And also 1 copy of the Elder Spell. This one I'm pretty iffy on, but this deck's like worst matchup by far is probably the Tron matchup. So just being able to blow up like Ugins and Karn Liberateds and then just add loyalty to our planeswalkers. And even if we don't have planeswalkers to add loyalty onto, just being able to destroy all of theirs. I figured it was at least worth testing out in a sideboard slot as a one of. And that is Esper Lattice. So again, if you want to get this out, if you have Teferi, you can play Teferi. He turns off counter magic, so then you kind of have the all clear to drop Karn and then drop the Mycosynth Lattice or Ensnaring Bridges, whatever you need. Keeps them off of counters, draws you cards, let you wrath the board at instant speed. And that is Esper Lattice for Modern.